Hey everyone, tonight we're going to slip behind the heavy stone walls of medieval convents, where the air hums with whispered prayers, forbidden passions, and secrets that could make a bishop blush. Picture yourself standing outside a cloister at dusk, the scent of damp earth and candle wax drifting through the air, knowing that inside, not every vow is as sacred as it seems. You probably won't survive this journey without raising an eyebrow or two. It's a wild ride through a world where chastity was preached, but not always practiced. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always cool to see who's tuning in from where. Now, turn down the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft background music, and let's get started tonight. You step through the heavy oak doors of a medieval convent, the air thick with the scent of incense and old stone. The walls, cold and unyielding, seem to whisper promises of piety, but you sense something else, a restless undercurrent, like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. This is a place where women swore to abandon the world, trading silk gowns for coarse habits and names for titles like sister or mother. Chastity was the vow that bound them, a sacred contract inked in candlelight and sealed with prayers. No touching, no longing, no stolen glances at the blacksmith who delivers firewood. In theory, you're a bride of Christ now, your heart reserved for the divine. But in practice, well, humans are messy, and stone walls don't always keep desire out. Back in the 12th century, when these convents dotted Europe like stars in a foggy sky, the vow of chastity was serious business. Bishops preached it, abbesses enforced it, and nuns nodded solemnly. Then, some got creative. You hear whispers of a nun in Tuscany who argued that a lingering hug with a visiting monk wasn't a sin if it was purely spiritual. Another claimed her midnight strolls with a local scribe were just discussing scripture. Historians still debate whether these were genuine misunderstandings or clever loopholes, but the records are clear. Not every sister saw chastity as non-negotiable. Church officials tasked with keeping things holy often scribbled complaints about excessive familiarity or unexplained orchard meetings. Translation: someone was sneaking kisses behind the apple trees, and it wasn't the Holy Spirit. Take the case of a 13th century convent in France, where a bishop's visit uncovered what he called a troubling lack of discipline. The canonical event here was the Council of Vienne in 1311, which tightened rules on convent behavior after reports of nuns bending vows. The odd detail: one nun was caught hiding a lute under her bed, claiming it was for sacred music. But the love songs scratched into the wood told a different story. You can almost picture her strumming away, moonlight spilling through the window, dreaming of someone who wasn't wearing a halo. It's almost romantic until the bishop shows up with a quill and a bad mood. Not every nun was sneaking around, of course. Many lived devoutly, their days filled with prayer, gardening, and baking bread tough enough to double as a doorstop. But for others, the convent was less a sanctuary and more a noble dormitory. Wealthy families sent their daughters here to avoid marriage scandals or secure a divine PR boost. You can imagine the chaos: a bored heiress, a handsome confessor, and a vow that feels more like a dare. It's like locking a cat in a room full of yarn and expecting nothing to unravel. And unravel it did, with some sisters treating chastity like a medieval version of terms and conditions, technically agreed to, but rarely read closely. You're starting to see the pattern. These women weren't just rebels. They were human, trapped in a system that demanded perfection while surrounded by temptation. The convent's walls were high, but desire climbs higher. And when you're stuck chanting psalms for decades, the line between devotion and distraction gets blurry. Like, really blurry. Ever try to focus on prayer when the gardener's got a smile that could melt a reliquary? Exactly. So, you linger in the cloister, hearing the faint echo of a lute, wondering what else these walls are hiding. Spoiler, it's a lot. Oh, and here's a little convent humor for you. Why did the nun bring a ladder to Vespers? Easier to sneak out during the boring hymns. Okay, maybe not their finest moment, but you get the vibe. The Middle Ages weren't just about cathedrals and crusades. They were about people bending rules in the name of passion, survival, or just a really good story. You're still inside the convent, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and secrets. The stone walls seem to lean in closer now, as if they know what's coming next. Chastity was one thing, vows could be bent, whispered away in the shadows. But pregnancy? That's a scandal that doesn't whisper. It shouts. You're walking through the cloister, past rows of silent cells, when you hear a rumor that makes your ears perk up. A nun, Sister Beatrice, from a convent in 14th century England, has been sent on retreat for months. The official word is, she's ill, but the novices are whispering about a belly that's hard to hide under a loose habit. You're about to learn that medieval convents had a knack for turning miracles into migraines. Pregnancy in a convent wasn't just a sin, it was a logistical nightmare. The vow of chastity was supposed to ensure no such surprises, but human nature had other plans. Church records from the period, like those from the 1321 visitation of a Yorkshire convent, reveal a canonical event. Bishop William Melton's investigation into irregularities uncovered 2 nuns who were, let's say, unexpectedly expecting. The odd detail? One claimed her condition was a divine gift, citing the Virgin Mary as precedent. The bishop wasn't buying it, especially since the local blacksmith was seen leaving the convent grounds at odd hours. Historians still debate whether these women genuinely believed in miraculous explanations or were just desperate for a cover story. You can imagine the panic. A nun's growing belly wasn't something you could tuck behind a prayer book. Convents scrambled to contain the fallout. Some sent the offending sister to a remote retreat until the situation resolved itself. Others declared sudden illnesses, keeping the nun confined to her cell with only a trusted novice for company. If a baby arrived, it was often whisked away under cover of night, sometimes to a foundling home, sometimes to a relative who owed the convent a favor. In darker cases, the records trail off, leaving only vague mentions of resolved matters or unmarked graves in the convent garden. You shudder, picturing a tiny headstone half hidden by ivy, inscribed with something cryptic like God's mercy. The fathers? That's where things get spicy. Priests, visiting nobles, even the occasional gardener, were named in hushed confessions. One trial in 1298 France pointed to a wandering minstrel with a charmingly indecent smile as the culprit. No further details needed. His harp probably did the talking. Punishments varied wildly. A peasant-born nun might face excommunication and exile, her life upended for a single misstep. A noble-born sister, though? Maybe a stern lecture and a sabbatical to a cushier convent. You can't help but smirk at the double standard. It's like medieval HR protecting the VIPs while the interns take the fall. And here's a little convent chuckle. Why did the nun blame her pregnancy on a ghost? Because demonic possession sounds better than "I tripped over Brother John." Not exactly a winning defense, but points for creativity. These scandals weren't isolated. They pop up in court records, bishops' letters, and even snarky tavern songs. The church insisted they were rare, but the parchment trail tells a different story. It's like trying to hide a bonfire in a haystack. Good luck keeping that quiet. As you move deeper into the convent, you realize these women weren't just breaking vows. They were navigating a world that demanded purity while dangling temptation in their faces. A pregnant nun wasn't just a scandal. She was a reminder that even the holiest walls couldn't lock out life's messiness. You glance at the shadowed corners, wondering who else was hiding what. The answer, you suspect, is written in the dust, waiting for someone to notice. You're wandering deeper into the convent now, the flicker of candlelight casting long shadows across the stone walls. The air smells faintly of ink and wax, and you can almost hear the scratch of quills on parchment. In this cloistered world, where silence is a vow and whispers are currency, love finds a way to speak through letters. Not just any letters, mind you, but secret ones, slipped through cracks, hidden in bread loaves, or passed by novices with suspiciously good poker faces. You're about to uncover a paper trail of passion that could make even the sternest abbess blush. In the 13th century, a convent in southern France became infamous for its literary indiscretions. The canonical event here is the 1267 investigation by Bishop Pierre de Castelnau, who uncovered a stash of letters that were less prayers to the divine and more, "Meet me by the orchard at midnight." The odd detail? One nun, Sister Marguerite, wrote to her priest lover about drinking from his chalice of devotion. The bishop, unimpressed by the metaphor, had the letter burned twice, just to be sure. Historians still debate whether Marguerite's flowery Latin was genuine devotion or a coded love note, but you can guess which way the bishop leaned. These letters weren't just scribbled confessions, they were lifelines. Face-to-face trysts were risky. Too many eyes, too many ears, so nuns turned to parchment. You picture a sister hunched over a candle, her habit sleeves brushing the desk, crafting words that could pass as spiritual but pulse with longing. Some were sweet, like a nun in Germany who wrote, "My heart sings psalms only for you." Others, let's just say they'd make a modern romance novelist jealous. One letter, intercepted in a 1292 Italian convent, described a monk's sacred embrace in terms that had the abbess reaching for her rosary. The logistics were a feat of medieval espionage. Letters were folded into tiny squares, tucked into psalters, or handed off during vespers by a novice who knew better than to ask questions. Some were even written in code, disguised as hymn notations or theological musings. You can't help but admire the ingenuity. It's like medieval texting, but with higher stakes and worse handwriting. When caught, the punishments were brutal. Public readings of the letters, imagine the cringe, solitary confinement, or, for repeat offenders, excommunication. The men involved, usually reassigned to a colder, less romantic parish, because apparently geography solves everything. Here's a little convent quip. Why did the nun's letter get her in trouble? Because Dear Lord and Dear Laurent look awfully similar in candlelight. Not exactly a classic, but it fits the vibe. These letters weren't just scandals. They were proof that love could outsmart locks and vows. Some correspondences lasted years, like a French nun who wrote to a nobleman for a decade, outwitting 2 abbesses and a nosy bishop. She was only caught when she slipped up and quoted Ovid in the choir book, "Too much poetry, not enough psalms." As you trace your fingers along the cold stone, you realize these letters were more than rebellion. They were a way to reclaim a piece of the world the convent tried to erase. Nuns might have been brides of Christ, but their quills had other ideas, scratching out desires that no vow could silence. You wonder what else is hidden in these walls, maybe a note still tucked in a crack, waiting to spill its secrets. You're creeping through the convent's shadowed corridors now, the air cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth and rosemary. The walls, thick as a castle's, were built to keep the world out, but some nuns had other plans. You're about to follow their footsteps, literally over walls, through drains, and out windows. Because when love or freedom called, these women didn't just whisper back. They climbed, schemed, and occasionally disguised themselves to break free. Escaping a medieval convent wasn't like sneaking out of a modern dorm. It took guts, planning, and sometimes a bedsheet rope that didn't snap halfway down. In 1323, a convent in Verona became the talk of the region when Sister Benedetta made her third escape attempt in a decade. That's the canonical event here, a scandal so bold it was recorded in the bishop's register with the exasperated tone of a parent who's had enough. The odd detail? Benedetta, sent to the convent at 14, didn't just sneak out. She forged travel papers and hitched a ride on a vegetable cart, dressed as a monk from a rival abbey. She made it halfway to Venice before a guard caught her, not because of her disguise, but because she couldn't resist flirting. Historians still debate whether her escapes were about love or just hating the cloister's endless silence. But you can feel her restlessness in the air. Picture it. You're scaling a wall with a makeshift rope, heart pounding as the night bell tolls. Some nuns bribed gatekeepers with smuggled wine. Others crawled through muddy drains that smelled worse than a medieval tavern. One group in Saxony, fed up with their abbess banning music, staged a breakout by overpowering a guard with, get this, a stale loaf of bread. You can't make this up. They vanished into the woods, described later as disoriented but unrepentant. It's like a medieval buddy comedy, minus the happy ending. Escape wasn't always about romance. Some nuns fled to escape the monotony of chanting and cabbage soup. Others, like a young sister in France, ran to reunite with a lover, a merchant who promised a life beyond the veil. Punishments for getting caught were no joke. Public shaming, fasting, or a one-way ticket to a stricter convent with worse food and higher walls. But for some, the risk was worth it. A few escapees married their lovers and vanished into the countryside, pretending they'd never seen a rosary. You can almost hear them laughing as they traded their habits for homespun, leaving the convent's silence behind. Here's a little convent jest. Why did the nun climb the wall? Because eternal silence sounds better in a tavern with a cute bard. Okay, maybe not their finest hour, but it captures the spirit. These women weren't just fleeing, they were rewriting their stories. The church called them rebels. You might call them pioneers. Every rope they knotted, every disguise they donned, was a middle finger to a system that demanded they disappear. As you stand in the cloister, staring at a high window, you wonder how many made it out and how many left a piece of their heart behind in these walls. You are standing in a quiet corner of the convent now, where the air smells faintly of lavender and polished wood. The walls seem to hum with a story so bold it could make a stained glass window blush. You are about to meet Sister Agnes of Würzburg, the nun who turned her cell into a medieval Airbnb for a knight in shining armor, literally. For over a year, she hid a wounded warrior in her quarters, and this wasn't just a fling, it was a scandal with clanking armor and a side of preserved figs. You can almost hear the bishop's quill scratching furiously as he tried to make sense of it all. The canonical event here is the 1378 investigation by Bishop Otto of Würzburg, who was tipped off by a novice hearing strange clanking from Agnes's cell. The odd detail: when church officials burst in, they found the knight hiding behind a tapestry, munching on figs and humming a hymn like he was just another monk doing chores. His defense, Sister Agnes is a healer of both body and soul, didn't exactly calm the bishop's nerves. Historians still debate whether Agnes was genuinely nursing a wounded man, or if healing was code for something steamier. But the fact that this went on for 12 months suggests some serious planning. Picture it: your Agnes, sneaking bread and bandages to a knight who's probably got a tragic backstory and a smile that could melt a reliquary. The convent's supposed to be a fortress of solitude, but here's this guy, limping around in borrowed monk robes, helping with the garden to blend in. It's like a medieval rom-com, except the stakes are excommunication and public shame. Agnes didn't deny the affair when caught. She doubled down, arguing that compassion was a holy virtue. Bold move, but the bishop wasn't buying it, especially when he noticed the knight's battle wound looked suspiciously like a tavern brawl scratch. The fallout was theatrical. Agnes was stripped of her rank, publicly shamed, and shipped off to a stricter convent where the soup was probably as cold as the walls. The knight, fined, exiled, and reportedly smirking the whole time, like he'd do it all again for another fig-fueled night with Agnes. You can't help but admire their commitment. It takes guts to hide a whole armored man in a convent for a year. The records note Agnes later wrote letters defending herself, quoting scripture and medical texts like a medieval lawyer. One line stands out: "Had I let him die, I'd be a sinner still." Talk about flipping the script. Here's a little convent chuckle. Why did the knight stay so long in the convent? Because Agnes's cell had better amenities than the local inn. Not exactly a 5-star review, but it fits the vibe. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a masterclass in audacity. Agnes and her knight proved that love, or whatever you call it, could outsmart even the holiest surveillance. As you linger by her empty cell, you wonder what else these walls saw. Probably more than the bishop ever wanted to know. You're gliding through the convent's dim chapel now, the air thick with the scent of old wax and murmured prayers. The flickering candles cast shadows that dance like restless spirits, and you're about to witness something that blurs the line between divine and downright scandalous. Some nuns weren't just breaking vows with secret lovers. They were having ecstatic visions so intense they made the whole convent raise an eyebrow. These weren't quiet moments of reflection. They were full on, trembling on the floor, eyes rolled back, spectacles that had bishops whispering, "Is this holiness or something else entirely?" You're diving into the world of mystic nuns, where spirituality and sensuality got a little too cozy. In the 13th century, a nun named Sister Beatrix from the Low Countries became a local legend for her divine encounters. The canonical event here is the 1247 inquiry by Bishop Robert of Liège, who investigated Beatrix's claims that Christ visited her nightly, not metaphorically, but physically. The odd detail: her writings described embraces of divine warmth and a union beyond the veil of flesh, which sounded suspiciously like a medieval romance novel. Historians still debate whether Beatrix's visions were genuine spiritual experiences or a creative way to express forbidden desires. But the bishop's report leaned toward hysteria masquerading as holiness. Ouch! Picture yourself in the chapel, watching Beatrix collapse mid-prayer, her voice rising in what sounds like a mix of devotion and delirium. She claims the Lamb of God is setting her soul ablaze, but the younger nuns are giggling, and the abbess is reaching for her headache remedy. These visions weren't rare. Mysticism was a big deal in medieval theology, encouraging intense emotional connections to Christ. But some nuns, like Hadewech of Antwerp, took it to another level. Her poetry about being pierced by divine light was so vivid that later scholars tried to tone it down. Spoiler: the originals are still spicy enough to make a monk drop his breviary. Not everyone was impressed. Skeptical church officials, like an archbishop who got reassigned for calling out overzealous sisters, worried these visions were less about God and more about attention, or worse, temptation. You can see their point. When a nun's describing fire spreading within and without, it's hard not to side-eye the subtext. Yet, some mystic nuns became celebrities, their visions copied and venerated, like medieval bestsellers. It's like they were writing divine fan fiction and getting away with it. The catch? These spectacles influenced impressionable novices who started having their own visions, and suddenly the convent felt more like a spiritual rager than a house of prayer. Here's a convent quip for you. Why did the nun's vision get her in trouble? Because divine ecstasy sounds a lot like "meet me in the cloister after dark." Not exactly a sermon starter, but it fits the mood. These mystic moments weren't just scandals. They were a reminder that the line between sacred and sensual was razor thin. As you stand in the chapel, feeling the weight of those fervent prayers, you wonder how many of these visions were real, and how many were just a way to feel alive behind these walls. You're sneaking through the convent's kitchens now, the air thick with the scent of warm bread and something forbidden. It's past midnight, and the bells have stopped ringing, but there's a faint clatter of pots and stifled giggles. You've stumbled into the world of secret feasts, where nuns, supposed to be fasting on porridge and piety, are indulging in smuggled wine, roasted goose, and wheels of cheese labeled as liturgical supplies. In the Middle Ages, fasting was a virtue, hunger a badge of holiness. But some sisters decided that a little indulgence wasn't a sin, it was a survival tactic. You're about to join a clandestine banquet where the only thing stricter than the vows is the rule against getting caught. The canonical event here is the 1342 investigation of a Burgundy abbey, where Bishop Jean de Moulins uncovered what he delicately called unapproved gatherings. Translation: Saturday night feasts complete with dancing, gambling, and enough food to make a saint jealous. The odd detail? The convent's inventory listed 2 ducks, a ham, a jug of cherry wine, and 3 wheels of cheese under sacred provisions. You can't help but smirk at the audacity. It's like claiming your pizza delivery is for spiritual reflection. Historians still debate whether these feasts were rebellious acts or just nuns trying to make cloister life bearable. But the bishop's report suggests they were having way too much fun for it to be purely practical. Picture it. You're huddled in a candlelit room, a table groaning under smuggled treats. A nun passes you a slice of hot pastry, whispering a psalm to keep up appearances. The goose is crispy, the wine is sweet, and someone's trying to justify it all by calling it communal bonding. These feasts weren't just about food, they were about defiance. Convents banned rich foods, especially during Lent. But nuns had their ways. Friendly merchants slipped them salted meats labeled as medicinal. Wine was rebranded as consecrated vinegar. Honey cakes appeared for visitors who never showed up. It's like medieval meal prep with a side of conspiracy. The guest list sometimes got spicy. Priests, merchants, or men with no clear reason to be there showed up after dark. One novice got caught with a burned hand from sneaking pastries out of the oven. She blamed the Holy Spirit, but the abbess wasn't buying it. You can almost hear the laughter, the clink of forbidden goblets, and the nervous whispers when footsteps echoed too close. Punishment, when caught, was swift. Fasting, ironic, public penance, or a one-way trip to a stricter convent. But for some nuns, the thrill of a midnight feast was worth the risk. It was their way of saying, "We're still human, and humans need more than cabbage." Here's a little convent jest. Why did the nun hide the cheese wheel? Because "Blessed are the cheesemakers" didn't make it into the Bible. Not their best sermon, but it fits the vibe. These feasts weren't just about breaking rules. They were about reclaiming joy in a world of endless restraint. As you slip out of the kitchen, the scent of roasted goose lingers, and you wonder how many other secrets these walls are hiding, probably as many as there are crumbs under the table. You're descending a creaky staircase into the convent's cellar now, the air growing colder, heavier, with a faint whiff of pickled cabbage and something unsettling. The flickering torchlight barely reaches the corners, where shadows seem to cling a little too tightly. You've heard whispers of grim discoveries beneath convent floors, places where secrets weren't just hidden, but buried. This isn't the warm glow of forbidden feasts or the flutter of love letters. This is the dark side of cloister life, where silence was used to cover tragedies that no amount of prayer could erase. You're about to uncover a scandal that left even the bishop speechless. The canonical event here is the 1391 investigation of a French convent near Poitiers, where church officials, tipped off by a novice's report of strange noises, dug up a patch of disturbed earth beneath a cellar barrel. What they found was a newborn's body, wrapped in a torn wimple the headdress nuns wore. The odd detail? The abbess claimed ignorance, insisting any childbirth must have happened before the mother entered the convent, an excuse so flimsy it practically crumbled under scrutiny. Historians still debate whether the abbess was complicit or genuinely unaware, but the records hint at a cover-up, with several nuns quietly relocated soon after. You can feel the weight of that silence, heavy as the dirt they shoveled back into place. Picture it. You're standing in that damp cellar, the air thick with dread. A novice, barely 16, whispers about cries that had no right to be there. The church's response was a masterclass in damage control, vague reports, quick transfers, and a lot of "let's pray this goes away." Hidden pregnancies weren't rare. They were a recurring headache for convents across Europe. When a nun's condition became undeniable, the playbook was grim. Send her away, claim illness, or, in the darkest cases, ensure the evidence vanished. Babies were left at monastery doors, smuggled to relatives, or worse, buried in unmarked graves. You shudder, imagining a tiny bundle under the floorboards, a secret no one dared speak aloud. The men involved, priests, gardeners, passing minstrels, were rarely named, let alone punished severely. The nuns bore the blame, their lives upended by shame or exile. Peasant-born sisters faced harsher fates than their noble counterparts, who might get a slap on the wrist and a new convent with better linens. It's like medieval justice had a sliding scale based on your family name. The church called these incidents regrettable, but the pattern suggests they were less rare than anyone wanted to admit. Every repaved cellar, every reorganized pantry held the potential for another heartbreaking find. Here's a little convent quip to lighten the mood. Why did the cellar stay quiet? Because even the ghosts knew better than to snitch. Not exactly a crowd pleaser, but it fits the somber vibe. These buried secrets weren't just scandals. They were reminders that the convent's walls hid more than love or rebellion. They hid pain, fear, and choices no one should have to make. As you climb back up the stairs, the cellar's chill lingers, and you can't help but wonder what else lies beneath, wrapped in linen and silence. You're standing outside what used to be a convent in 15th century Bologna, but the vibe is off. The stone walls still loom. The air smells faintly of incense, but there's a new kind of traffic men coming and going, none of them looking particularly prayerful. You've stumbled into the scandal of Sister Clara, a former nun who didn't just break her vows. She turned the convent into a brothel, habits and all. This isn't your typical cloister drama. It's a full-on rebellion against everything the church stood for, with a business plan that would make a medieval merchant jealous. You're about to walk through the doors of the Cloister of Delight, where piety took a back seat to profit. The canonical event here is the 1476 investigation by Bologna's magistrates, who noticed the convent had become suspiciously popular with men who weren't exactly there for vespers. The odd detail, Clara's brothel used the old habits as costumes, offering clients a confession experience that raised more theological questions than it answered. Historians still debate whether Clara was a cunning entrepreneur or just fed up with monastic life, but her shrug during questioning, "At least no one here pretends to be chaste," suggests she knew exactly what she was doing. You can almost see her, standing defiant, as the church scrambled to shut her down. Picture it. You're inside the repurposed convent, where the chapel's now a lounge, and the air smells of cheap wine and cheaper perfume. Clara, once a willful nun who skipped prayers for wine with a guy named Marco, didn't just leave the convent, she flipped it into a thriving business. Her staff, ex-nuns, and creatively unemployed women running the place with military precision. Clients paid extra for the nun outfits, because apparently some people's fantasies are very specific. It's like medieval cosplay, but with higher stakes and worse consequences. The church was horrified, not just because of the prostitution common enough in cities, but because Clara had the nerve to make a mockery of their sacred space. The fallout was swift. The church excommunicated Clara, then excommunicated her again for good measure. The building was seized, the operation dismantled, and Clara was banished to a nunnery far away, which feels like the ultimate irony. Yet her legend lived on. Locals called the site the Cloister of Delight for years, and it even popped up in bawdy plays and songs. You can't help but admire her audacity. It takes guts to turn a house of God into a house of negotiable affection. The church tried to erase her, but Clara became a folk hero, proof that some nuns weren't just breaking rules, they were rewriting them. Here's a little convent chuckle. Why did Clara's brothel thrive? Because her prayers had a better return policy than the church's. Not exactly a hymn, but it fits the vibe. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a middle finger to the system, wrapped in a habit and served with a smirk, As you step away from the now quiet walls, you wonder how many other rebels like Clara slipped through history's cracks, laughing all the way. You're kneeling in the convent's confessional now, the wooden booth creaking under the weight of whispered sins. The air smells of polished oak and faint incense, but there's a tension here, a sense that not every confession ends with absolution. You're about to step into the confessional scandals, where the sacred act of bearing one's soul sometimes led to bearing a bit more. In medieval convents, priests were meant to guide nuns toward salvation, but some took ministering to the soul as an invitation to explore less holy terrain. You're diving into a world where the curtain between priest and penitent was a little too thin, and the consequences were anything but divine. The canonical event here is the 1354 case of Father Anselm of Tours, who, according to church records, developed special spiritual intimacy with 10 nuns in a single convent. The odd detail, Sister Magdalene emerged from one session giggling and smelling faintly of clove wine, which wasn't exactly standard confessional fare. Historians still debate whether Anselm was a serial manipulator or just spectacularly bad at boundaries. But the abbess's suspicions, sparked by Magdalene's tipsy exit, led to a full investigation. You can almost picture her, squinting through the confessional grill, wondering if "Forgive me, Father" was code for something else entirely. Imagine it. You're a nun, pouring out your heart in a cramped booth, the priest's voice soft and reassuring. But then the questions get personal, the silences linger, and suddenly you're discussing temptation in a way that feels unscriptural. Confession was private, intimate, and ripe for abuse. The setup was almost too perfect. A male authority figure, a vulnerable nun, and a curtain thick enough to hide a multitude of sins. Across Europe, reports trickled in of confessors meeting nuns at odd hours, or receiving theological questions that read like love letters. One priest was caught checking a novice's knee for demonic possession. Creative, but not convincing. You can't help but roll your eyes at the audacity. The church's response? A delicate mix of silence and shuffling. Accused priests were often reassigned to another diocese, because apparently a change of scenery fixes everything. Nuns, meanwhile, faced shaming or blame, accused of seducing the priest with their feminine charm, which often just meant being under 30 and breathing. Some sisters refused to confess again, choosing silence over sanctity, which says a lot about how broken the system was. It's like medieval HR decided the best way to handle misconduct was to move the problem and hope nobody notices. Here's a little convent quip. Why did the nun avoid confession? Because the priest's absolution came with too many follow-up questions. Not exactly a sermon classic, but it captures the mood. These scandals weren't just about rogue priests. They were about a system that put power in one hand and trust in another, then acted surprised when things went wrong. As you step out of the confessional, the air feels heavier, and you wonder how many secrets stayed trapped behind that curtain, whispered but never absolved. You're strolling through the convent's herb garden now, the air alive with the sharp tang of rosemary and the earthy musk of damp soil. Rows of plants stretch before you pennyroyal, tansy, rue, each with its own quiet power. You're about to meet the apothecary sisters, nuns who knew their herbs a little too well, blending potions that could soothe a headache or solve a far more delicate problem. In the Middle Ages, every convent had a garden for healing, but some sisters turned it into a pharmacy for secrets. crafting remedies that danced on the edge of sin. You're diving into a world where a nun's knowledge of plants could be both a blessing and a scandal. The canonical event here is the 1423 inquiry into Sister Hildegard of Trier, an herbalist described in records as having great discretion in her concoctions. The odd detail, a nervous witness testified that her potions could undo what the flesh hath done, a poetic way of saying they ended pregnancies. Historians still debate whether Hildegard was helping desperate women or running a covert operation, but her reputation as a healer made her a go-to for delicate problems. You can picture her, mortar and pestle in hand, grinding leaves under moonlight, her face calm as she measured doses that could change lives. Imagine it. You're a nun, trembling as you approach the herbarium, whispering about an irregular cycle. Hildegard hands you a vial, calling it a remedy for nervous humors, but you both know what it's for. Herbs like rue and pennyroyal were medieval Plan B, used discreetly to restore balance or cover tracks. Some convents became quiet havens for women with inconvenient pregnancies, noble or otherwise. A lady might arrive for a spiritual retreat, leave 2 months later looking slimmer, and no one asked questions. It's like a medieval spa day, but with higher stakes and less pampering. The church didn't officially approve, but as long as things stayed quiet, bishops turned a blind eye. Discretion was the real currency here. Of course, not every potion was so serious. Sisters brewed balms for aches, teas for colds, and tinctures for demonic possession. Success rate questionable. But the darker rumors persisted: love spells, potions slipped into wine, or mixtures that could silence a cough or a scandal. In 15th century Europe, a nun with a knack for herbs could be hailed as a healer or whispered about as a witch. It's like walking a tightrope with a pestle in one hand and a rosary in the other. One wrong step, and you're facing an inquisitor with a grudge. Here's a little convent jest. Why did the nun's potion always work? Because her herbs had more secrets than the confessional. Not exactly a hymn, but it fits the vibe. These apothecary sisters weren't just healers. They were chemists of survival, navigating a world where knowledge was power and silence was safety. As you brush past the rue, its bitter scent lingers, and you wonder how many whispered problems these plants solved, and how many secrets they buried in their roots. You're standing in a bustling medieval courtroom now, the air thick with the smell of ink, sweat, and self-righteous indignation. The convent's stone walls are far behind, but its scandals have spilled into the secular world, where nuns face judges instead of bishops. You're about to witness the legal dramas that dragged cloistered women into public view, their habits no match for lawsuits over love, money, or broken promises. These weren't just trials. They were spectacles, where scripture met slander, and the church scrambled to keep its dirty laundry off the public's clothesline. You're diving into a world where a nun's vows didn't shield her from a summons. The canonical event here is a 1412 case in Florence, where Sister Constanza sued a priest for breach of promise after he allegedly seduced her in the confessional and then ghosted her faster than a medieval messenger. The odd detail? She brought receipts, letters, witnesses, and a pointed poem that practically sang of betrayal. Historians still debate whether Constanza was a scorned lover seeking justice or a savvy litigant playing the system, but the court's 3-year delay suggests they were stumped by her audacity. You can picture her, veil askew, reading her poetry aloud while the judge rubs his temples, wishing he'd stayed in bed. Imagine it. You're a nun, facing a room full of grim-faced men in robes, not the holy kind who are dissecting your private sins. Convents tried to handle scandals internally, but when they spilled into civil territory like theft, child abandonment, or fraud, secular courts got involved. In Cologne, an abbess was hauled in for misusing convent funds to buy luxury linens and gifts for visitors who looked suspiciously like well-groomed suitors. The trial's expense report reads like a medieval Yelp review for a shady inn. Her defense? It was all for spiritual hospitality. The judge wasn't buying it, and neither are you. It's like claiming your wine budget is for charity bold, but shaky. Punishments varied. A nun in Burgundy, accused of attacking another sister over a man, claimed demonic possession and jealousy, which got her a reduced penance and a new address. Peasant nuns faced harsher fates, exile, or public shaming, while noble-born sisters often skated with a warning. The church hated these public airings, but gossip spread faster than a tavern brawl. Locals buzzed with lines like, "Did you hear about the nun with the wine bill?" Or, "She brought her dowry and her boyfriend to court." It's like medieval reality television, but with more Latin and fewer cameras. Here's a little convent quip. Why did the nun go to court? Because her vows didn't cover heartbreak lawsuits. Not exactly a chart topper, but it fits the vibe. These trials weren't just about justice. They were about a system stretched thin, trying to contain women who refused to stay silent. As you leave the courtroom, the echo of Constanza's poem lingers, a reminder that even in a world of veils and vows, some nuns fought back with ink and nerve. You're wandering through the convent's relic room now, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, where shelves hold treasures that draw pilgrims like moths to a flame. These aren't just bones or scraps of cloth. They're sacred marketing tools, pulling in coins and devotion. But not every relic is what it seems. You're about to uncover the world of dubious holy artifacts. Think saintly hairbrushes and questionable fingernails that turned convents into medieval tourist traps. Some nuns played fast and loose with authenticity, and the faithful didn't always mind. It's a strange mix of faith, hustle, and just enough skepticism to keep things spicy. The canonical event here is the 1387 inspection of Abbess Euphemia's convent in Thuringia, where she proudly displayed a piece of Mary Magdalene's hairbrush. The odd detail? The bishop, after sniffing it, literally, declared it a merchant's comb that reeked of rosemary and goat. Historians still debate whether Euphemia was a con artist or just overly enthusiastic, but her relic raked in pilgrim donations until the bishop shut it down. You can picture her standing by the altar, urging visitors to kneel before the comb and drop a coin, her face a mask of pious confidence. Imagine it. You're a pilgrim, footsore and hopeful, staring at a sliver of cowhorn labeled as Saint Apollonia's fingernail, patron saint of toothaches. The abbess swears it's legit, but you're side-eyeing the relic case, wondering if faith is supposed to smell like livestock. Convents were relic factories, churning out bits of holy detritus, tears of the Virgin, thorns from Christ's crown, even 6 different skulls of John the Baptist math wasn't their strong suit. Some were genuine, or at least ancient enough to pass muster, but others, pure creativity. One nun claimed her convent had a handkerchief still damp with Mary's tears. You can't help but admire the gall It's like selling a saint's laundry as a miracle. These relics weren't just for show, they were big business. Pilgrims brought coins, convents gained prestige, and everyone ignored the occasional whiff of goat. When a Bruges convent's fingernail was exposed as cow horn, the abbess pivoted, saying the miracle was in the faith, not the object. Smooth move, but you're not sure the pilgrims felt the same. The church tolerated these ruses as long as the donations flowed. But when scholars or bishops got nosy, convents had to scramble. It's like running a medieval Etsy shop with a no refunds policy and a lot of incense to cover the evidence. Here's a little convent jest. Why did the nun sell a fake relic? Because holy hairbrush sounds better than I need to fix the roof. Not exactly a psalm, but it fits the vibe. These relic ruses weren't just scams. They were a testament to the nuns' ingenuity, turning faith into a currency that kept their convents afloat. As you step away from the relic case, you wonder how many pilgrims left with lighter purses and heavier hearts, believing in miracles that were just a little too convenient. You're pacing the grand halls of the convent now, where the air carries the faint scent of parchment and polished stone. The abbess's chamber looms ahead, its door carved with saints but hiding a different kind of power. You're about to meet the women who ran these cloisters like velvet-gloved warlords, abbesses, who outsmarted bishops, managed estates, and played politics with a smile and a prayer. These weren't just nuns. They were CEOs in habits, wielding influence under the guise of humility. In a world that frowned on women holding power, these sisters built empires within their walls, and you're stepping into their domain. The canonical event here is the 1,365 land deal orchestrated by Abbess Matilda of Essen, who negotiated a treaty with a rival monastery over fishing rights, roasting their abbot in flawless Latin. The odd detail, she publicly corrected a visiting count's grammar during a feast, earning her a reputation as both pious and terrifying. Historians still debate whether Matilda's sharp tongue was a calculated flex or just her losing patience, but her convent thrived under her rule. You can picture her, quill in hand, drafting letters that balanced diplomacy with a subtle threat, all while pretending to care about embroidery. Imagine it. You're a novice, watching Matilda charm a duke into donating land, then turn around and bribe a local official with a blessed relic. Convents weren't just prayer houses. Many controlled vast estates, collecting tithes and managing tenant farmers. Abbesses like Matilda were landlords, diplomats, and spies, all rolled into one. Some convents had scribes who doubled as fencers. Talk about a resume. In Normandy, a nun delayed a papal decree by losing a letter, giving her abbess time to secure a political marriage for a noble sister. It's like medieval chess, but with rosaries and higher stakes. These women weren't just surviving, they were thriving in a man's world. The church grumbled about female authority but loved the taxes their estates brought in. Noble families parked daughters in convents not for piety, but as strategic agents, passing intel or swaying decisions. When bishops tried to crack down, abbesses played innocent, quoting scripture while their scribes hid the real ledgers. It's like running a mafia with better calligraphy. One German convent even had a lawyer nun who could argue canon law in her sleep, and you're pretty sure she didn't sleep much. Here's a little convent quip. Why did the abbess outsmart the bishop? Because her prayers came with a side of blackmail. Not exactly a Vespers classic, but it fits the vibe. These powerhouses didn't just break the glass ceiling, they built their own cathedral and called it stewardship. As you leave Matilda's chamber, the echo of her sharp Latin lingers, a reminder that behind every veil was a mind that could move mountains, or at least a few inconvenient priests. You're lingering in the convent's quietest corner now, where the air feels still, almost too still, heavy with the scent of old stone and faded incense. The walls seem to hold their breath, guarding secrets that never made it to the bishop's reports or the courtroom's ledgers. You're about to uncover the silent scandals, the ones buried not in gossip, but in strategic hush. Babies swapped, nuns vanished, sins erased with a whispered agreement and a closed door. These weren't loud betrayals. They were careful, procedural cover-ups, where silence was the loudest player. You're stepping into a world where the convent's deepest truths were wrapped in linen and buried in shadows. The canonical event here is the 1,389 case of Abbess Theodora, who ran her southern German convent like a medieval CEO. When 3 novices turned up pregnant in a single year, she blamed spiritual temptation and ordered stricter fasting for everyone except herself. The odd detail? She accused inquiring clerics of envy and threatened to withhold prayers for their souls, a power move that shut them up fast. Historians still debate whether Theodora was protecting her nuns or her reputation, but the swift relocation of the novices suggests she knew how to make problems disappear. You can imagine her, standing tall in her chamber, her voice calm but her eyes daring anyone to dig deeper. Picture it. You're a novice, overhearing whispers about a sister who took ill and vanished overnight, her cell reassigned by morning. No tears, no questions, just a new face at Vespers. Convents like Theodora's mastered the art of quiet erasure. A pregnant nun might be sent to a distant retreat, her absence explained as a pilgrimage. Babies were spirited away to foundling homes or sympathetic families, their existence reduced to a vague entry in the convent's books. In one chilling case, a Milan abbey gained a reputation as a refuge for reformed women, former courtesans who prayed just enough to keep up appearances while strutting in silk robes and keeping peacocks in the garden. The bishop called it a minor concern. Rome called it profitable. These scandals weren't shouted, they were smothered. Theodora's convent ran like a well-oiled machine, lands managed, dukes hosted, prayer vigils so elaborate they needed seating charts. But behind the scenes, silence was the real currency. A nun's sudden illness, a cellar repaved, a ledger adjusted it all, kept the convent's halo polished. Even the devout got creative. One mystic nun claimed visions only when fasting and spinning, twirling at 30 revolutions per minute until her abbess banned it, calling it divine dizziness. You can't help but smile, but the weight of these cover-ups lingers, heavy as the cloister's walls. Here's a final convent quip. Why was the convent so quiet? Because silence was cheaper than a trial. Not a hymn for the ages, but it fits the mood. These silent scandals weren't just about hiding sin. They were about preserving a system that demanded perfection while wrestling with humanity's messiness. As you step away from the convent, the shadows soften, the walls blur, and the stories fade into whispers. The nuns, their secrets, their rebellions, they slip into the night, leaving only echoes of lives that refused to be fully silenced. The convent fades now, its stone walls dissolving into the dusk like a dream you can't quite hold. You're back in your room, the fan humming softly, the lights low, the world outside quiet. The stories of these nuns, their loves, their rebellions, their secrets linger like the scent of candle wax, gentle but persistent. They were women bound by vows, yet they found ways to live, to feel, to defy. Some loved in secret, others fled, a few turned silence into power. Their scandals weren't just missteps. They were proof of life pulsing behind the cloister's walls, raw and unapologetic. As you settle in, let the weight of their stories rest. They remind you that even in the tightest cages, the human spirit finds a way through a letter, a feast, a whispered herb. The convent's gates are closed, the candles snuffed out, but the echoes remain, soft as a prayer, stubborn as a heartbeat. Sleep well, knowing these women, long gone, still speak in the quiet. Their secrets are yours now, tucked into the folds of history, waiting for you to dream them alive again.